The gavel slammed as the packed courtroom gasped, the sound echoing like thunder across a stormy night. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashing, chaos unraveling as Emma Grace, once America's pop darling, sat frozen at the defense table. She had been adored for her golden voice, but tonight, headlines screamed betrayal and crime. Emma Grace whispered, "This can't be real," her trembling hands gripping the table's edge. Beside her, Daniel Cross, the calculating music executive who built her empire, leaned back with a cold smirk hidden from the jury's view. Julia Park, the relentless prosecutor, stood tall, her voice cutting through the tension as she declared, "The world has been living a lie, and tonight, the truth stands exposed." In the gallery, Lisa Monroe, Emma's loyal assistant, covered her mouth in horror, while a quiet figure, Michael Lee Neighbors, sat stiffly, knowing what he had seen could ruin everything. Then came the first blow. Evidence revealed Emma Grace's glittering charity foundation was nothing more than a facade for fraud. The shockwave rattled every corner of the courtroom. Emma Grace's eyes darted across the room, landing on Oliver Reed, the tragic fellow artist, who had once sworn to protect her but now sat broken, his career shattered by her scandal. Headlines blazed across every screen, "Pop idol at center of shocking fraud trial." And in that moment, the fall began, the applause of millions replaced by silence so sharp it cut like glass. The storm of cameras outside made the courthouse look like a concert, except tonight, no fans screamed Emma Grace's name. Reporters shouted questions like arrows, but she kept her head low, escorted by guards. Julia Park stood firm in front of the press, declaring, "This is not celebrity gossip, this is crime." Daniel Cross slipped past with a smile, whispering to an aide, "Shall crumble before the week is done." Lisa Monroe followed Emma Grace, whispering desperately, "Please, Emma, tell them the truth." But Emma Grace only shook her head, lips sealed. Michael Lee blended into the crowd, guilt gnawing as he watched the circus unfold, knowing his testimony might destroy her completely. Oliver Reed, caught by paparazzi at the side entrance, shoved cameras away, shouting, "Leave her alone." But the chants grew louder, the headlines sharper. The chaos was no longer on stage, it was everywhere she walked. Emma Grace once owned the spotlight, now she was trapped in it. Inside a dim holding room, Emma Grace sat alone, the walls closing in with silence sharper than screams. She whispered, "I never meant for it to be this way," tracing circles on the table. Lisa Monroe entered, eyes red, begging, "Emma, they'll bury you if you don't speak." Emma Grace looked away, her reflection fractured in the glass pane. Daniel Cross stepped in, his voice dripping with menace. "The empire falls with you, and I won't go down alone." Lisa Monroe shouted, "You ruined her," but he only laughed, walking out. Emma Grace broke down, her voice shaking, "I trusted him." On the other side of the glass, Julia Park watched silently, lips pressed tight. She muttered to herself, "The truth will come out." Outside, Michael Lee sat in the corridor, clutching his phone, torn between silence and duty. Oliver Reed strummed a broken chord on his guitar, the sound echoing hopelessly. The evening news rolled across every channel, anchors repeating the scandal with sharpened tones. Pop idol Emma Grace accused of orchestrating fraudulent charity schemes, one reporter announced. Clips of her dazzling concerts were spliced against the courtroom footage, her sparkling gowns replaced by prison gray shadows. Fans stood outside, some crying, others chanting, "Justice." Lisa Monroe begged Emma Grace over the phone, "Say something, anything." But Emma Grace replied coldly, "Silence is all I have left." Daniel Cross appeared on a primetime interview, smirking, claiming, "I warned her about her reckless choices." Julia Park prepared files late into the night, muttering, "We'll rip through the lies tomorrow." Michael Lee scrolled through threatening messages, fear clutching him, while Oliver Reed stared at his faded poster of their duet, whispering, "You destroyed us both." Morning light broke harshly over the courthouse, crowds already gathering as if waiting for a show. Emma Grace arrived in handcuffs, eyes hollow, her lips pressed tight. Reporters screamed, "Did you steal from children, Emma?" Julia Park strode past, her case files tucked under her arm, her resolve like steel. Daniel Cross walked just behind Emma Grace, pretending innocence while feeding a whispered comment to a journalist. Lisa Monroe wept silently, clutching Emma Grace's scarf like a lifeline. Michael Lee stood hidden at the edge of the crowd, face pale, knowing today he would be called to testify. Oliver Reed, blocked by security, shouted, "She's not the monster you think!" His voice was drowned by chants for justice. The courthouse doors closed, the stage set for destruction. The courtroom chaos faded into memory, but the world demanded answers. News anchors rewound Emma Grace's story, reminding viewers of her meteoric rise. Clips replayed her first televised audition, her trembling voice transforming into a powerful ballad that silenced the judges. Emma Grace once said, "Music saved me from nothingness, and fans believed her every word." Her journey from a small-town waitress to chart-topping sensation became a modern fairy tale. Lisa Monroe whispered to friends in disbelief. She worked day and night. She never stopped fighting. But with every highlight, shadows lingered. Rumors of Daniel Cross manipulating her contracts surfaced. Old footage of Oliver Reed standing beside her at award shows replayed, his smile genuine, his downfall tied to hers. Julia Park narrated in interviews, even in fame, cracks begin to show, her tone cold but sharp. Michael Lee's name surfaced in local whispers, neighbors remembering him watching from afar. The anchor's voice cut through. America fell in love with Emma Grace, but love can blind the truth. The audience remembered the girl with golden hair and a voice that pierced silence. Emma Grace once laughed on stage, "I'll sing until the stars burn out." Fans clung to her optimism, chanting her lyrics across stadiums. Lisa Monroe recalled, "She never slept, she gave everything to them." Yet, beneath the spotlight, Emma Grace collapsed in exhaustion, hidden from the world. Daniel Cross tightened his grip, whispering into her ear backstage, "You owe them more, Emma, always more." Oliver Reed tried to shield her, once grabbing her hand as she nearly fainted, saying, "You don't have to prove yourself anymore." But she pulled away, desperate to please. Julia Park studied those old clips now, noting how the cracks were already visible in her exhausted eyes. Michael Lee remembered hearing late-night rehearsals, the same songs echoing endlessly. The glamour dazzled the nation, but seeds of betrayal grew quietly behind every smile. Emma Grace's rise wasn't just about music, it was survival. She grew up in a town where dreams rarely left the horizon. She once said, "If I stayed, I'd disappear." The narrative of escape sold millions of records. Lisa Monroe often repeated, she was fire in the cold, explaining her drive to reporters. Yet as her fame grew, so did Daniel Cross control. He negotiated contracts in smoke-filled rooms, smiling as Emma Grace signed papers she barely read. Oliver Reed warned, "They're draining you," but his words vanished in applause. Julia Park found evidence of these contracts later, tracing every signature like a puzzle. Michael Lee recalled seeing moving trucks late at night, her life boxed and shipped under secrecy. Emma Grace wore success like armor, but beneath it, fractures deepened. She smiled for cameras, but her voice carried cracks of exhaustion the world chose to ignore. At the height of her fame, Emma Grace became untouchable. She filled stadiums with roaring fans who raised glowing lights like stars in her honor. She whispered into the microphone, "You are my family," and the crowd wept. Lisa Monroe said she believed those words, but knew her exhaustion was crushing her spirit. Daniel Cross celebrated backstage, champagne spilling as he declared, "She belongs to the world now." Oliver Reed tried to intervene, stepping onto the stage once, placing an arm around her, but she smiled for cameras, masking her weakness. Julia Park later remarked in an interview, "Even empires fall when their foundation is hollow." Michael Lee sat in cheap seats once, staring in awe, but his awe turned to dread as rumors began to circulate. Emma Grace's stardom blinded millions, but behind the glitter, betrayal already sharpened its knife. The emotional tether between Emma Grace and her fans was unbreakable, or so they thought. She once told a late-night host, "They saved me as much as I saved them." Tears in her eyes earned her the label America's sweetheart, Dang. Lisa Monroe confided privately. She was already breaking, but the world saw perfection. Daniel Cross used her vulnerability to sell more records, coaching every interview. Oliver Reed shook his head backstage, muttering, "She's a product now, not a person." Julia Park examined those tapes years later, spotting the forced smiles, the hollow laughter. Michael Lee, who lived next door in those years, recalled hearing her sobbing alone when the cameras left. The anchor's voice returned with a dagger. She was adored by millions, but perhaps betrayed by those closest to her. The foundation was love, but it was also doom. The glow of Emma Grace's fame dimmed as cracks spread in her carefully built image. Tabloids splashed photos of her stumbling from a club at 3 a.m. Mascara smudged, eyes hollow. Lisa Monroe begged Emma, "You can't keep going like this," but Emma Grace snapped, "I just need the world to love me one more time." Daniel Cross whispered to a reporter in exchange for cash, planting rumors that fueled headlines. Oliver Reed watched the frenzy, his voice breaking as he told a friend, "She's being torn apart, and no one cares." Julia Park studied the leaks, recognizing deliberate sabotage, while Michael Lee sat at his kitchen table, reading stories, knowing the truth ran deeper. Paparazzi turned every slip into spectacle, their flashes merciless daggers. The world began to shift, adoration fading into doubt, trust cracking under weight. And then, one night, the phone call came that changed everything. The morning papers screamed betrayal, with headlines twisting every word. Emma Grace sat on her couch, staring at the ink that painted her as a liar and thief. Lisa Monroe whispered, "We can fight this," but Emma Grace muttered, "The world already believes I'm guilty." Daniel Cross posed for cameras outside a restaurant, flashing a charming grin, pretending loyalty while feeding flames. Oliver Reed smashed his phone in anger, shouting, "They're crucifying her." Julia Park presented documents to her team, connecting Emma Grace's accounts to missing funds. Michael Lee sat on his porch, haunted by what he saw that night, questioning if silence made him complicit. Fans who once cried at her concerts now flooded social media with rage. The descent quickened. The idol's pedestal cracked, and the fall had only begun. Television anchors replayed footage of Emma Grace's charity gala, now framed as evidence of fraud. Glittering gowns and applause turned sinister under narration that said, "She fooled us all." Lisa Monroe defended her in interviews, crying, "She gave her life to helping people," but skeptics laughed. Daniel Cross sat in a boardroom plotting quietly, his lawyers nodding in approval. Oliver Reed performed at a small club, dedicating a broken song to Emma Grace, whispering, "She's not the villain you think." Julia Park compiled testimony from staff who claimed money went missing, tightening the noose. Michael Lee walked past the courthouse, hearing chants demanding justice. Emma Grace stared at the TV in silence, her image crumbling before her eyes. The same stage that once crowned her now buried her beneath betrayal. Emma Grace's circle fractured further. Friends who once cheered her backstage now sold secrets for profit. Lisa Monroe stormed into her apartment, yelling, "They're all betraying you," but Emma Grace only sat with a bottle of wine, whispering, "Maybe I deserve it." Daniel Cross cut deals in shadows, ensuring he would emerge untouched. Oliver Reed punched a wall, furious at the industry's silence, muttering, "They'll watch her burn." Julia Park worked late nights, piecing together a timeline that exposed every false smile. Michael Lee received another anonymous call, warning him to stay quiet or face consequences. Paparazzi swarmed every step Emma Grace took, their flashes more blinding than spotlights. The idol who once shone bright was now cornered in shadows, the storm pressing closer with every hour. One night, the phone rang, shattering the fragile silence. Emma Grace answered with a trembling voice, "Hello?" On the other end, Julia Park's voice cut cold. "There's more than fraud here, Emma. Someone will testify against you." Emma Grace dropped the phone, her breath sharp, her hands shaking. Lisa Monroe grabbed her shoulders, saying, "We can still fight this." Daniel Cross, across the city, raised a glass with smug satisfaction, knowing the trap was closing. Oliver Reed sat in darkness, strumming a final chord that faded into silence. Michael Lee paced in his small apartment, whispering, "If I speak, it all ends." The night grew heavier, rain tapping on windows like a drum of doom. The world didn't just doubt Emma Grace anymore. It prepared to condemn her completely. The trial shifted when Julia Park revealed sealed documents, her voice steady but sharp. She declared, "This isn't just fraud, this involves organized crime." The room erupted in shock, whispers spilling like wildfire. Emma Grace froze, her heart pounding as her face paled. Lisa Monroe clutched her arm, whispering, "Tell me you didn't know." Daniel Cross smirked, hiding behind polished lawyers, as though the storm was his creation. Oliver Reed gasped, shouting, "She's not like them." Security silenced him quickly. Michael Lee felt his chest tighten, the truth he carried suddenly heavier than ever. Julia Park's words cut again. Money from her charity funded laundering schemes tied to dangerous networks. Emma Grace whispered under her breath, "No, no, this can't be real." The audience, once sympathetic, turned hostile, eyes piercing with betrayal. The mask shattered. The world learned the scandal was far darker than they ever imagined. The revelation spread faster than wildfire. News outlets ran banners reading, "Pop idol linked to crime syndicate." Emma Grace stared at the screen in disbelief, whispering, "They'll never forgive me." Lisa Monroe sobbed, begging, "Say something, Emma, fight back." Daniel Cross dined with investors that evening, raising his glass with a grin, "Her destruction is my freedom." Oliver Reed spoke on a late-night radio show, voice breaking, "She's a victim, but no one will listen." Julia Park doubled security on the case, warning powerful men don't want this truth exposed. Michael Lee received threatening letters, his hands shaking as he read, "Stay silent or vanish." The glamour had vanished, replaced by danger and shadows. Emma Grace's downfall was no longer about her career. It was about survival against forces much bigger than she ever imagined. The twist deepened when an anonymous witness came forward. Michael Lee. He sat across from Julia Park, his voice shaking. "I saw the men at her house that night. They weren't fans. They were collecting money." Julia Park leaned closer, whispering, "This could change everything." Emma Grace sat in another room, clutching her head, muttering, "Hell destroy me." Lisa Monroe argued with her, saying, "You have to tell the truth, Emma, before they use him against you." Daniel Cross smiled knowingly when he heard, telling his lawyer, "He's weak. They'll silence him soon enough." Oliver Reed, hearing the news, shouted into a phone, "Michael, don't do this. You don't know what they'll do to you." Michael Lee hung up, his hands trembling, the weight of the decision pressing harder. The case was no longer about fraud. It was entangled in crime, betrayal, and survival. Evidence grew darker. Photographs surfaced of Emma Grace's charity accounts funneling money into offshore banks linked to criminal networks. She stared at the photos, whispering, "I never saw this, I swear." Lisa Monroe held her, saying, "They used you, Emma." Daniel Cross held a press conference, his mask flawless as he said, "She betrayed the trust of millions." Oliver Reed slammed his guitar mid-performance, storming off stage, muttering, "They're killing her soul." Julia Park prepared indictments, determined to expose everyone involved, muttering, "No one is untouchable." Michael Lee sat in his car outside his home, noticing a black SUV parked nearby, unease growing in his chest. The twist became undeniable. The idol was no longer seen as a victim or a star, but a pawn trapped in a game controlled by predators and shadows. The world sat in stunned silence. The twist was undeniable. The idol adored by millions was entangled in a crime so deep it threatened everything. Emma Grace looked into the mirror, whispering, "Was I blind, or just too desperate to believe?" Lisa Monroe broke down, yelling, "You trusted the wrong people, Emma." Daniel Cross leaned back in his chair, muttering to himself, "The queen has finally fallen." Oliver Reed, broken, sat in his dark apartment, strumming silent chords that no one would hear. Julia Park tightened her jaw, whispering, "This isn't about fame anymore. It's about justice." Michael Lee packed a suitcase, his hands shaking, terrified of what awaited him. The mask was gone, the truth unmasked, and the nightmare had only begun. The world thought they knew the scandal, but the darkness was far worse than anyone imagined. The courtroom erupted as the trial reached its breaking point. Julia Park slammed evidence onto the table, declaring, "These accounts prove Emma Grace's involvement." Emma Grace shook her head violently, whispering, "They're twisting everything." Lisa Monroe cried out from the bench. She was manipulated, but the judge silenced her. Daniel Cross leaned forward, smirking as he whispered to his lawyer, "The walls are closing in on her, not me." Oliver Reed shouted from the gallery, "You're destroying her life." Guards restrained him, dragging him out. Michael Lee, pale and shaking, took the stand, his voice cracking as he said, "I saw the meetings, the money exchanged. It wasn't hers." The audience gasped, torn between outrage and disbelief. Emma Grace collapsed into her chair, tears streaking her face as cameras captured every trembling breath. The trial had shifted. The climax had begun. Reporters filled the courthouse steps as chaos spilled into the streets. Emma Grace was escorted out in cuffs, her face streaked with tears under flashing lights. Lisa Monroe screamed at the press she didn't do this alone, but her voice was drowned out by shouts. Daniel Cross walked freely past reporters, smiling as if untouchable. Julia Park addressed microphones, stating, "This trial is not about fame, but about justice." Michael Lee avoided cameras, slipping into a waiting car, his guilt carved into his expression. Oliver Reed broke past barriers, yelling, "She's being sacrificed." Police restrained him again as flashes erupted like gunfire. Emma Grace whispered to herself, "The world doesn't see the truth anymore." The chants of the crowd grew louder, calling her a fraud, as if the verdict had already been decided before the judge spoke. Inside the courtroom, Julia Park called her final witness. Michael Lee sat stiffly, sweat glistening, whispering, "I can't do this." Julia urged, "The truth is your only shield." Emma Grace stared at him, eyes pleading, "Please don't betray me." Lisa Monroe whispered from behind, "He'll destroy you if he speaks." Daniel Cross folded his hands smugly, whispering to his aide, "This is the end of her." Oliver Reed pressed against the glass from the outside hallway, shouting muffled words of protest. Michael Lee finally spoke, his voice shaking. The money wasn't hers, she was forced. The courtroom erupted again, divided between gasps and shouts. Julia Park's expression hardened. She muttered under her breath, "Then who controlled it?" Emma Grace wept silently, realizing the trap was closing, and that truth was no longer enough to save her. The climax ignited when Daniel Cross was suddenly named in testimony. Michael Lee stammered he arranged the meetings. He profited from it all. Julia Park's eyes widened, whispering, "Finally, the thread unravels." Emma Grace gasped, muttering, "It wasn't me, it was him." Lisa Monroe cried with relief, shouting, "The truth is here." But guards silenced her again. Daniel Cross' smirk faded, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear. Oliver Reed screamed triumphantly from the hall, "I told you." Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras rolling as the courtroom fell into chaos. The judge demanded order, his gavel echoing like thunder. Daniel Cross leaned forward with venom, muttering, "You'll regret this." Emma Grace's tears became sobs, but for the first time, hope flickered in her eyes. The world saw the shift. The villain had been named. The verdict loomed, the weight crushing every breath. Emma Grace stood as the jury filed back in, her hands trembling. Lisa Monroe clasped her hand, whispering, "No matter what, I believe you." Daniel Cross sneered across the table, muttering, "It ends tonight." Julia Park faced the jury, her eyes unyielding as she awaited the words. Michael Lee lowered his gaze, guilt tearing through him. Oliver Reed pressed his face to the glass, whispering prayers no one could hear. The foreman spoke, "We find the defendant." Silence swallowed the room. Emma Grace closed her eyes, tears falling as the crowd leaned in. The words would decide her life, her legacy, her ruin. The climax cut like a blade. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her destruction. The courthouse emptied, leaving silence heavier than applause ever was. Emma Grace sat alone in her cell, staring at peeling paint, whispering, "I used to hear music in silence, now I hear nothing." Lisa Monroe visited, gripping her hands through cold steel bars, whispering, "I'll stay with you, no matter how far you fall." Daniel Cross held a press conference across town, spinning the narrative as though he were innocent, smirking, "Justice has been served." Julia Park returned to her office, exhausted but resolute, muttering, "This case is far from over." Oliver Reed sat in a small bar, strumming a hollow tune to an empty room, whispering, "She was the only light I had." Michael Lee stayed hidden, drawing blinds tight, terrified his testimony had signed his death warrant. The glittering empire was ashes now, and Emma Grace was left in the ruins of her own name. Days turned into weeks, and the frenzy died down, but the scars remained. Emma Grace whispered to Lisa Monroe during visitation, "Do they still hate me?" Lisa replied softly, "They've moved on, but I haven't." Daniel Cross expanded his empire quietly, his smirk sharper than ever as he declared to partners, "One queen falls, another rises." Julia Park received anonymous warnings in the mail, reading, "Drop the case or face the same fate." She burned the letters, but her resolve deepened. Oliver Reed performed in small clubs, his songs bitter elegies for love and betrayal. Michael Lee avoided public life completely, his paranoia feeding on every shadow. Emma Grace's once bright smile had vanished, replaced by silence, her legacy rewritten in scandal. The world no longer adored her, it tolerated her memory as a cautionary tale. Emma Grace's mansion, once filled with lights and music, now sat abandoned. Fans who once camped outside had vanished, replaced by silence and weeds. Lisa Monroe drove past it, whispering, "She gave everything to this place, and now it's nothing." Daniel Cross sold rights to her old music, announcing, "Profit has no loyalty." Julia Park visited the estate briefly, searching for evidence, whispering, "Every shadow tells a story." Oliver Reed left a single flower at the locked gate, muttering, "I'll never forget you." Michael Lee avoided the area completely, too haunted to return. Inside the house, dust-coated trophies, gold records tarnished under neglect. The empire was reduced to a museum of broken dreams. The silence inside those walls was louder than any crowd Emma Grace had ever faced in her life. Emma Grace gave her first interview from prison, voice hollow but steady. "I was blind, but I wasn't evil," she said. Lisa Monroe sat by her side, whispering encouragement. The journalist leaned forward, asking, "Do you regret it all?" Emma Grace paused before answering, "I regret who I trusted." Daniel Cross watched the interview from his penthouse, muttering, "She still doesn't understand." Julia Park highlighted the contradictions in Emma's testimony, whispering, "She's still protecting him." Oliver Reed watched from a bar, whispering, "She's breaking in front of us all." Michael Lee turned off the TV quickly, unable to bear the weight of his guilt. The world debated whether Emma Grace was victim or villain, but in her eyes, she had already lost everything. The storm had passed, but the ruins remained. Emma Grace sat in her cell at night, writing quietly in a notebook, whispering, "If I can't sing for them, maybe I'll write for myself." Lisa Monroe visited less often, exhausted by the endless fight, but still whispered, "I'll never abandon you." Daniel Cross toasted champagne in celebration of a new artist he launched, muttering, "History forgets quickly." Julia Park closed the case files, whispering, "Justice is never finished," before locking them away. Oliver Reed played alone on a rooftop, his music echoing into the empty night sky. Michael Lee moved far away, but even in a new town, he couldn't escape the whispers of what he had done. The resolution was neither victory nor redemption. It was the haunting truth that no one left unscarred. The prison yard was gray, beneath the fading afternoon sun. Emma Grace walked slowly, her steps heavy, whispering, "I was once adored by millions. Now I'm forgotten by all." Lisa Monroe watched from the visitor's gate, tears falling as she whispered, "You're not forgotten, Emma. Not to me." Daniel Cross on a news broadcast celebrated his new artist, smugly telling reporters, "This is a new era, and Emma Grace is yesterday's story." Julia Park, alone at her desk, reviewed surveillance footage from the charity offices one last time, muttering, "There are pieces missing still." Oliver Reed sat on a rooftop, staring at the city, his guitar silent beside him. Michael Lee drank alone in his kitchen, whispering, "I helped destroy her." The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across Emma Grace's face, leaving only a hollow shell of the idol the world once claimed to love. The media frenzy had quieted, but whispers remained. Emma Grace stared at old fan letters piled in her cell, whispering, "They loved me once, maybe they still do." Lisa Monroe placed one letter against the glass, saying, "Some still believe." Daniel Cross reclined in his penthouse, muttering, "Belief doesn't sell records, scandal does." Julia Park presented her final report, warning, "This case is a scar on justice itself." Oliver Reed, mid-performance in a dim club, broke down mid-song, saying, "She gave everything, and they took it all." Michael Lee shredded a threatening letter he received, trembling as he whispered, "I'll never be free of this." The quiet of the world was deceptive. Her story lived on, whispered in shadows, dissected on screens, a ghost that haunted every ear that once adored her voice. Rumors swirled online. Some believed Emma Grace was innocent, others saw her as a monster. Emma whispered in her cell, "My truth doesn't matter anymore." Lisa Monroe whispered back, "It matters to me." Daniel Cross appeared in glossy magazines, his new artist shining beside him, muttering off camera, "They'll never know how deep this went." Julia Park paced late at night, whispering, "There's more buried, but they've locked the doors." Oliver Reed smashed his guitar in fury, screaming, "The world destroyed her." Michael Lee sat alone, haunted by dreams of black SUVs and threats. The narrative belonged not to Emma anymore, but to the hungry mouths of media and rumor. Her life was now a ghost story retold at dinner tables and in headlines, stripped of music, stripped of truth. The night before sentencing, Emma Grace sat in silence, writing in her notebook, whispering, "If the world hates me, let them remember me in my own words." Lisa Monroe hugged the glass divider, sobbing, "You're stronger than they think." Daniel Cross attended a gala, laughing as though untouched, muttering, "History forgets the broken." Julia Park signed her last statement, whispering, "I did what I could." Oliver Reed stared at an old poster of their duet, whispering, "You were more than they ever saw." Michael Lee sat with a gun in his lap, whispering, "I don't know if I can carry this guilt anymore." Outside, storm clouds gathered, thunder rumbling, as though the world itself prepared to witness the final blow. The morning arrived cold and gray. Emma Grace was led into the courtroom for her final sentencing, her steps echoing. She whispered, "This is the end. But maybe not my silence." Lisa Monroe mouthed, "I love you," tears streaming. Daniel Cross sat smugly, convinced he had won. Julia Park stood firm, whispering, "This isn't over." Oliver Reed pressed his hand against the glass, whispering, "Don't let them erase you." Michael Lee sat in the gallery, trembling, whispering, "I never meant to ruin you." The judge's voice cut through, "This sentence will define history." The cameras clicked, the audience held its breath. The final blow wasn't the verdict, it was Emma Grace's last words. She raised her head and whispered into the silence, "I wasn't destroyed by my enemies, I was destroyed by myself." The world froze in shock.